Storytimers! Welcome back to Storytime at the Neill-Cochran House Museum. I'm your storyteller, Karen. So guess what? We are actually sitting inside the Neill-Cochran House Museum, not just in front of a virtual background this week. The museum still unfortunately isn't open, but I got exclusive access just for Storytime. Isn't that exciting? Especially since this week is all about Pecos Bill. Pecos Bill is a legendary cowboy whose story is as big as Texas itself. And I'm really excited to share this version of the Pecos Bill story by Nanci A. Lyman. So what do you say we get started? Get nice and comfortable, grab a blanket, maybe your teddy bear, and let's get started. Pecos Bill by Nanci A. Lyman, illustrated by Bert Dodson. Prologue. The legend of the super cowboy Pecos Bill comes to us from the time when the American West was still wild. Cattle and broncos roamed the lonely plains. At night, cowboys would gather around a campfire to tell tales of the West and the story of the first cowboy, Pecos Bill. The cowboys may have stretched the truth a little when they spoke of Pecos Bill, but after all, the West was a big place and needed a special hero. Someone as special as Pecos Bill. Very likely, there are few people who can say that they owe everything they know to an animal, but there was one such fellow who could say that. He was Pecos Bill, the greatest cowboy of all time. It might seem strange that a wild animal could teach someone to be a great range rider, but Pecos Bill swore it was true. He often said that his best ideas about cow punching came from the coyotes. Bill learned firsthand from the coyotes because he was raised by them. In fact, Bill thought he was a coyote for the first 18 years of his life. Until Bill was born long ago under the wide skies of Texas, real cowboys just didn't exist. Instead, there were prairie dogs and rattlesnakes, hot winds and cactus, and miles of emptiness. In those early days, people always seemed eager to move on. Some just wanted to get to the other side of the mountain. Some wanted new ranch lands. Others simply didn't want to be crowded in. Bill's pa was that way. He had a wife and more than a dozen children. When some settlers moved nearby, about 50 miles off, it was more than pa could tolerate. "We need more elbow room," he said to Bill's ma. "I don't like this one bit." Ma herself was anxious to move on. Any problems that might be ahead wouldn't bother her. She was tough and determined, and that's how she raised her children. The decision was made to move further west. The old covered wagon was hitched to a spotted cow and a roan horse. It was packed with all the family's belongings. Children sprawled everywhere, bellowing all the way, as children sometimes do. Bill himself, his bright red hair blowing in the breeze, was packed securely in the rear of the wagon. Travel was rough to say the least. There were rocks and sagebrush and few, if any, trails to follow. But when the family reached the Pecos River and had to cross the high waters, the turning point came in Bill's life. The old wagon thrashed about and finally pulled ahead, but out bounced Bill. A very long time passed before the family realized that someone was missing. By then it was dark, and it was too dark to go look for Bill. "Don't worry," said Pa. "Bill is smart. He'll figure out something." But Ma did worry, and she thought about it again and again. The last time she could remember seeing him was at the Pecos River. So thereafter, the baby became known as Pecos Bill. Of course, Bill didn't know that then. He wouldn't know his true name for many years. Now, falling off a covered wagon and being left alone would be a frightening experience for most babies. But Bill took it in his stride. Shortly after he bounced out of the wagon, he was found by a very smart coyote. His name was Grandy, and he was the granddaddy of all the coyotes. At their first meeting, baby Bill and Grandy looked each other over very carefully. At first, Bill thought Grandy was a dog. Bill petted him and said many flattering things about how handsome he was. Grandy was finally soothed, and a good thing too. It was well known in the coyote world that human beings were dangerous creatures. Grandy said that Bill seemed nice too, considering he was a human. To Grandy, however, Bill's ears looked very small. For many years, no two could have been closer friends. The young boy did not know how to speak his own language well, but he found it easy to learn the talk of the coyotes and all the other animals. Grandy taught baby Bill everything he knew. He showed Bill where the coyotes made their dens. "I'll show you berries and roots and nuts to eat," Grandy told him. Later, Bill learned to enjoy other favorite foods of the coyotes. Bill learned to hunt, to outwit enemies, to be as fleet as an antelope and as strong as a lion. And Bill learned manners too. As time passed, Bill learned to speak the language of every animal and bird around him. Spirited and born with a natural sense of mischief, Bill enjoyed meeting in a circle of his coyote friends in the evenings. They would bark and howl depending on the mood of the night. By the time he was a young man, Bill thought of himself as a coyote. Anything the coyotes could do, he could do, and maybe better. All the coyotes had something to teach Bill, and so did most of the wild beasts that Bill met. There were two exceptions, though. The rattlesnake was one. The rattler hissed and said he would do as he pleased. He would not be Bill's friend, and that was that. The woozer was the other animal who would not be Bill's friend. That was to be expected, of course, for the woozer was a nasty creature indeed. It was a huge animal, and strange too, a sort of combination of bear and mountain lion. Since all the other animals expected it to be nasty, that was just how it acted. The wowzer would not be Bill's friend, and that was that. But even without the rattlesnake and the wowzer as friends, Bill's had a happy young life. He was tall and healthy, and he grew strong and swift. He was proud to belong to the coyotes. His early memories of human beings were all but lost. Then at last, a dreadful moment of sadness came. Old Grandy was dying. "Can't I help you?" Bill asked his friend. "After all you've done for me, there must be something I can do." But Grandy knew better. He had become too weak to lead the pack. One day, he went out alone in the hills. Bill knew he would never see his great teacher again. Naturally enough, this was a time of grief for Bill. Sometimes he would lie in the tall grass and say to himself, "What am I to do now?" Then one day when he was resting, Bill heard an odd noise. His nose wrinkled. He smelled something strange. He jumped up yelping, ready for the worst. Before him stood a pony, pawing the ground and snorting as it came to a halt. Bill had seen horses before, but atop this horse was another sort of creature. Bill raced around and around the pony. All the time he kept getting whiffs of something. Bill didn't realize it at the time, but that something was a man. The strange thing was making noises. Was it talking? If it was, it certainly was not talking coyote language. Finally, Bill settled back, his long hair shining red in the sun. He listened to the noises the creature was making. "Baby," the creature seemed to be saying. Bill repeated the word. He had always been good at repeating sounds. "Baby," Bill said back. He had heard that word before. Slowly the creature got off his horse and walked toward Bill with his hand out. He spoke more words quietly, and Bill began to repeat them. In a way, it was a miracle that Bill's first meeting with a human creature was with his very own brother. His name was Chuck, and he was very quick and intelligent himself. Chuck had recognized a telltale sign on Bill. It was a mark of a star on his arm. Chuck himself had one. All of Bill's brothers and sisters had one. That way Ma and Pa could tell who belonged to the family. Chuck knew there was no mistake. Here was Pecos Bill, who had been shaken loose from the covered wagon years and years ago. Chuck spent a lot of time with Bill. teaching him the human language, and he explained about his rightful name. Bill learned quickly, but there were problems in the beginning. For one thing, it was a great shock for Bill to learn that he was a human creature. Could it possibly be true? "I've got fleas," Bill told his brother, but Chuck said that cowboys often had fleas. "But I've sat in the circle of coyotes, howling at the night," said Bill, "and I'm faster than any human creature ever could be." Chuck believed those things were true, but he led his brother to a stream of calm, clear water. "Look in the water," Chuck said to Bill. "Do you see any bushy tail behind you? You know every coyote has a bushy tail. You don't have one, so you can't be a coyote. You're a human." Even so, it was confusing and frightening to Bill at first. He wanted to live the life he had known. As he saw it, the good life was being free and running wild through the prairie, sleeping wherever he chose, breathing the clean, fresh air. But Chuck said that Bill would not lose those things. He could be free on a ranch, and with his great skill and strength, there was no doubt he would become the world's greatest cowboy. At last, Bill saw the truth. He agreed to join his brother in the adventures that lay ahead. While Bill ran off to say goodbye to his coyote friends, Chuck went back to the ranch. First off, he had to tell the boys about finding his brother, and he had to tell Gun Smith, the leader. Chuck warned them to treat Bill gently at first, for Bill knew very little about being human. Next, Chuck had to collect some clothes. At the moment, Bill was still running around naked along the plains. That was acceptable for coyotes, but human beings had different ideas. When Chuck returned, he carried with him a small pile of clothes. "What are those things?" Bill wondered. He found out fast enough. In a few minutes, Bill didn't know what to complain about most. His clothes scratched, his boots squeezed, and Bill's fleas flew about wildly as Chuck cut his hair. But finally, he was presentable. Presentable enough to be introduced to the gang at the ranch. Chuck had an extra pony for Bill. Bill thought that was unreasonable. He could easily outrun any horse. Chuck thought that was probably true. Still, he said, it would look better if Bill rode a horse. Horse or not, the first meeting was difficult for Bill. He still didn't speak very well, so mostly he was silent while everyone else spoke. And then it came time to eat. Bill gobbled up his food, just as he had done when he was with the coyotes. Then he turned around and saw the cowboys staring at him. And he saw that they were using knives and forks and spoons. So Bill tried to use knives and forks and spoons. He felt foolish, but by the time the meal was over, he'd gotten the hang of it. That was one of the special things about Bill. He made lots of mistakes when he was learning how to be human again, but he only made them once. The other special thing was that Pecos Bill really did know an amazing amount of things. The coyotes are wise animals, and they taught him well. The very first night at the ranch, after supper, the cowboys decided to play some games. They figured they could make a fool of Bill. They thought they could outwit him or outsmart him, but they couldn't. Anything they did, Bill could do, and better. Finally, Bill ended the evening by showing them some things they'd never seen before. He'd learned them from the coyotes. First, he performed the fanciest dancing and whirling possible, and then he sang songs. The songs were so beautiful that even the most rugged cowboys wept. And they all said that they too would make up music about the western skies and plains. After a while, the cowboys realized they were up against something special, and Pecos Bill realized that just like old Grandy, he was born to be a leader. "Who's the boss of this outfit?" Bill asked. He knew full well it had been Gun Smith. And what did Gun Smith do? He just smiled and said, "Well, I was, but no more. You're the boss from now on, Bill. Y-O-U, tell us what to do." And that's when cowpunching got its real start, when Bill took over. Of course, no king of the range can be boss for long without his own horse. The boys suggested that Bill buy a horse in town. Instead, Bill took some of the cowboys out onto the open range to watch a herd of wild mustangs. He found one to his liking and threw a saddle on it. That was the cowboys' first lesson in cowpunching. Bill fanned the horse's ears with his hat, rearing and backflipping and sidewinding. The cowboys had never seen anything like it before. Then he taught them to yell, "Yippee!" and "Ride 'em, cowboy!" From then on, and any time a new cowpuncher wanted a new horse, he didn't go to town to buy one. Instead, he caught it himself on the open range and broke it in just as Bill had. Pecos Bill decided that his first horse was much too tame, so he looked around the open range again, and there he saw a fine golden Mustang. Oh, this was a mighty horse. But just like Bill, the horse had a mind of its own, and no way was that horse going to let some human creature get on its back. While the cowboys stood around, Pecos Bill and the horse tested each other. It was a mighty battle of wills, but finally, after some long, hard riding, the horse decided that maybe Bill wasn't so bad after all. In the end, Bill and his horse became great friends. The horse was so quick and so special and so fast that Bill named him Lightning. They rode the Western Range together for years in good times and bad. Bill had only one bad experience with Lightning. One day, Pecos spied a very pretty young lady at the ranch. Her name was Slewfoot Sue, and she was something special too. At the time Bill saw her, Sue was riding a huge catfish in the middle of the river and having a great time. Bill admired her spirit, and he said so. Soon he began to bring her flowers and take long walks with her in the moonlight. It was Slewfoot Sue's wild spirit that did her in, though. She insisted that she had to ride Bill's horse. In fact, she agreed to marry Pecos Bill only if she could ride Lightning. Now, Lightning wouldn't let anyone but Bill on his back. Bill knew that. But what could he do? One night, soon after they were married, Slewfoot Sue jumped on Lightning's back. True to his nature, Lightning bucked. He bucked so hard that Sue flew into the air. So high it seemed she was tossed up to the moon. As far as anyone knows, Bill never saw Slewfoot Sue again. Oh, but Bill was sad. He couldn't believe he had lost Sue. He looked everywhere for her, but it was no use. Sue was gone. It was a good thing for Bill that he had lots of work to do. It helped him take his mind off Sue. There was so much to teach his men about cowpunching. They had to learn to rope cattle, to ride herd, and to hold a roundup. In earlier times, the cowboys let the cattle roam the open range. When they wanted a steer or cow, they set a trap. They would place a loop of rope on the ground and then hide behind a rock. A cow would come along and step into the loop. The cowboy would pull the rope. If he were lucky, he'd catch the cow. That way, maybe they could catch 1 or 2 animals a week. Bill considered the situation. Looks to me to be wasting time, he figured. I'll have to change that. So Bill took a few days off to practice flipping a long rope over his head. He called it a lariat. He got the idea from some of his battles with his old enemy, the rattlesnake. Bill thought that if he made a loop in the rope and spun it out, he could catch a cow in the loop. When Bill had mastered the art of lassoing, as he called it, he showed his men how it worked. They marveled at his invention. In no time at all, their herds grew by the thousands. Then Pecos had to teach his men how to herd the steers to keep them from roaming wherever they liked. The cowboys would have to ride out with the cattle, staying with them day and night. There were many complaints, of course. Most of the men didn't care for the idea. They'd rather be back in the warm bunkhouse. But Bill, who knew how joyful it was to be out under the stars, persuaded them to try it. It didn't turn out bad at all. Once the cowboys learned how to sing to the cows, and once the cook brought the cooking shack, called a chuck wagon, along. In fact, it turned out so well that Bill decided to visit ranches all over the Southwest to tell others of this great plan. But a cowboy's life wasn't all work. Bill taught folks something else that he'd learned from the coyotes: how to have fun. Bill showed the men what skills were needed for bronc riding and bulldogging, hog tying, and all manner of competition. Prizes were awarded to the best. The cowboys took to the idea right away, and today they still enjoy these games. They're called rodeos, and there's hardly a person who doesn't like them. The years passed, and Pecos Bill helped to increase the herds all across the country. There was just nothing he didn't know and couldn't teach about cowpunching. And then, one day, Bill was gone. No one knows where for certain. Maybe he went back to the coyotes. Some said that he wandered to California, where he spent time inventing cowboy movies. He might have done that for a spell, but the truth is, Bill is probably still searching for Slewfoot Sue. And as the cowboys said, no matter where Sue got to, if anyone could find her, it would be Pecos Bill. For all we know, Bill is still searching for Sue, but the cowpunchers carry on their work. Most all of them remember Pecos Bill and his great notions about the range. He was the best cowboy of them all. Pecos Bill, what a teacher he was. The end. Pecos Bill, legend of the West, Texan, cowboy, maybe the first and greatest cowboy. The story is so exciting for those of us here at the Neill-Cochran House Museum because it speaks to all of the great qualities of Texas life and what it must have been like when people were first moving to this area and first building this incredible house. I hope you all enjoyed this week's story. If you did, be sure to go to nchmuseum.org and sign up for our newsletter. That way you can always get updates on everything new that's going on here at the museum. Also, be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And remember, even if you can't be here like me, you can still be here virtually. So be sure to download our virtual backgrounds. And be sure to check out what incredible events we have coming up at the Neill-Cochran House Museum. I hope you enjoyed the story, and I'll see you next week. So long, Storytimers.